Hi, everyone. I'm John Langan. I'm the author of the collection of stories Sefira and Other Betrayals, which has been nominated in the Superior Achievement in a Fiction Collection category for the Stokers this year, for which I'm very grateful. And I'd like to take a couple of minutes today to read to everybody from the opening story in that collection, which is called Sefira, and it's about a woman who is chasing a succubus across America, across the country. Um, and at the beginning of the this, it's a short novel, really. At the beginning of it, this woman has we've watched her as she drives east from the east out into the west, out into Montana. We've watched her eyes gradually turning black. And now we're at the point in the narrative where we kind of rewind, and we learn that as her eyes were turning black, things were also happening to her teeth. So I'll read a little bit of that. Her third day of driving, Lisa noticed that her teeth hurt. She had turned off I-80 for a series of local roads that led her into West Virginia via its northern spur, then down its heaped mountains. At a convenience store perched on a ledge beside a rushing stream, she bought a pre-made ham and cheese sandwich, a packet of Twinkies, and an extra-large coffee, over which she held the glass sugar dispenser until the surface of the drink had risen to the cup's lip. She bent to taste it and decided she had added enough sugar to render the bitter, oily brew drinkable. By the time she was nearing the bottom of the cup, the bland sandwich and dessert cakes long gone, their bunched wrappers rolling on the passenger side floor as she steered the curves of an especially convoluted road, her teeth had started to ache. The pain was dull, distant, rooted somewhere beneath the enamel in the pulp. It spread through her mouth as if she'd bitten into a scoop of ice cream straight from the freezer. She rolled her tongue around the inside of her cheek, tasted sugar gritty on her teeth, reviewed the past few days' diet of heavily sweetened coffee, snack cakes, any kind of soda so long as the label mentioned caffeine, and candy bars. Terrific, she thought. Not only is something wrong with my eyes, I'm going to need a root canal or three. One more thing to thank Gary and Sefira for. On the car stereo, Pink sang that she was still a rock star. Oh, fuck off, Lisa said, and hit the power. That night, in a gas station near the Kentucky border, Lisa dug the toothbrush and toothpaste for which she'd run into a Walmart 2 hours earlier out of their plastic bag and set to work cleaning her teeth. Once she was finished, she rinsed her mouth with iron-flavored tap water and brushed again. After she spat a second mouthful of foaming water into the sink, her teeth still hurt. She considered a third pass around her gums, decided her mouth felt sufficiently scoured for further brushing to be more obsessive-compulsive than hygienic. At least the pain wasn't any worse. She cleaned her teeth in the motel bathroom as soon as she awoke the following morning, and again after her vending machine breakfast of stale frosted cherry Pop-Tarts and blisteringly hot, tasteless coffee. Compared to the steady blackening of her pupils, the discomfort of her teeth was of minor concern, but it was sufficiently distracting for her to buy a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol at the rest area she stopped at for lunch and wash 3 chunky tablets down with a swallow of Coke. If the acetaminophen helped, it was to such a minute degree as to make no practical difference, which didn't stop her from taking another 3 that night between brushing her teeth and falling into the bed she'd taken at the Days Inn in Paducah. She was too exhausted for the pain to prevent her sleeping, nor was it strong enough to follow her into her dreams. Were her teeth really that yellow, she asked herself the next day, in the bathroom of the Cracker Barrel where she was waiting for her dinner to be served? She'd gone in to check her eyes, and while gazing in the mirror had noticed her teeth, which continued their background ache, and which she continued to treat ineffectually with the Tylenol, telling herself that the pain might be worse without it. No doubt she should search out a dentist, but if she weren't tending to her eyes, then she wasn't likely to do anything for her teeth, which were jaundiced, as if she'd been using coffee as a mouthwash, which she just about had been. She drew back her lips and dragged her index finger left to right across them, from canine to canine. Her skin squeaked on the enamel, but the color remained unchanged. She sighed, resumed her sunglasses, and returned to her table, where her dinner was waiting for her. After she was done, she ordered a large coffee to go. She had far enough to drive tonight not to, but grimaced as she did. Her eyes were in too much discomfort the preceding morning for her to worry over the state of her mouth. At one point, vision swimming with Visine, she glanced in the rearview mirror and thought that her teeth looked more yellow in the middle, as if their discoloration were spreading up and out from the soft spaces where they continued to ache. Not until the day after brought her eyes relief, however, did she devote any time to a closer inspection of her mouth. In the ladies' room of a Burger King on the outskirts of Denver, whose heavy stink of piss gave the lie to the cleaning schedule posted on the door, Lisa tugged the corners of her lips up and away with her fingers. The tooth enamel was the yellow of daffodils left to rot in a vase of stagnant water. The color concentrated down the center of each tooth, where it described irregular lines, zigzags, lightning bolts. Toward the edges, her teeth grew paler to the point of translucency. She traced a finger over them and was surprised to feel them rough as sandpaper in places. Leaning into the mirror, she saw that the roughest spots matched where the yellow was most dense. She slid her fingers along the contours of her bite, top, then bottom. Her teeth were sharper, more jagged, tugging her fingertips. She wasn't sure when she made the connection between the blackness overtaking her eyes and the hurt daily filling her mouth. Almost from the start, she supposed. It must have been the second day her teeth ached that she didn't realize, knew, that the two were related, joint symptoms of something she wasn't prepared to contemplate, the straw that, dropped on top of everything else, Gary, that house, was going to leave the camel a quadriplegic. So she clenched that straw in her hand and held it there as eastern Kentucky and its domed mountains smoothed into the western reach of the state and its long swells of earth, rows of dark green tobacco rippling like spokes on a wheel as she sped past them on local roads that finally released her into Paducah. She held that straw tightly the following day when she was back on the highway and heading north up the length of Illinois, through the flattest land she'd ever seen, the only disturbances in it man-made, overpasses for local roads, until she reached Champaign-Urbana, and Sefira's trail looped back south, and Lisa Wade continuing north, picking up 90 and trying to reach Montana ahead of her to set up some kind of ambush, versus pulling off at the next exit so she could pursue Sefira down the state. She heard Madame Sosostris saying, "You must adhere to the path she is making." She opted not to break off her chase and drove through a thunderstorm that took up the entire early evening sky, lightning like bright seams in the clouds, rain crackling on the windshield. By the time she was crossing the broad Mississippi into St. Louis, the gray ribbon of the arch on her right appeared to be slowly rotating as she stole glances at it, which she was reasonably sure it wasn't meant to do. So she drove to the outskirts of the city, found the parking lot of a McDonald's, and let unconsciousness take her. Yet she never released her hold on that crippling straw, not that night and not the next day, as she made her slow way across Missouri to eastern Kansas, with its surprisingly steep gullies, and onto the state's western flatlands, despite her eyes feeling as if someone had poured coarse sand into them. When she detoured through Topeka in search of a hospital, she almost lost her grip on the straw, could feel the camel's legs trembling, but she recovered herself and turned in the direction of the interstate. Nor did the straw come as close to slipping from her again as the grasslands of western Kansas thinned to the arid waves of eastern Colorado, day bleeding into night. She took a room at a day's inn overlooking a reach of brown grass at the center of which a gray, single-story farmhouse listed toward a dead tree. The next day, the first part of her journey led her along a series of local roads, past long barbed wire fences strung on tilting posts, lots crowded with cattle, a row of towers carrying power lines above the landscape like metal giants. She wondered when she'd see the Rockies, and then there they were, huge even through the distance and haze, nothing at all like the Appalachians. Those mountains shouldered age, history so ancient most of it had been ground off them. These peaks leaned against the sky as if reclining on it, monuments to unimaginable gods, or those gods themselves. Not until she was standing in the ammoniac air of a restroom in Denver did Lisa relax her palm, and in so doing discover that she had squeezed the straw with such force for enough time that it had slipped under her skin, dissolved into her blood, infiltrated the nooks and crannies of her brain to the point its burden of dread had dissipated. Of course the blackening of her eyes, the yellowing of her teeth were related. It would be far stranger if they weren't. Braced, if not cheered by her truth-telling, Lisa ordered a bacon double cheeseburger, large onion rings, and large Coke to go, watching from behind her sunglass as the cashier's attempt to limit her glances at her mouth. Meal in hand, she flashed the server a smile that made her jump. If you can't have fun with your monstrous transformation, she thought, crossing to her car, what can you have fun with? I'll pause there. So again, thanks very much for listening to me read. And thanks very much for attending these virtual festivities. I hope you have a great time. And thank you again for the honor of the nomination of my book. All right. Take care, everybody.